Hey everyone, welcome to our Friday Facebook Live for all of our global group fitness community, personal trainers, and anybody else who wants to join us. I'm Angie Miller. I'm an AFAA mentor and an NASM master instructor. I also produce Angie's Tips, which are group fitness teaching tips that you can find on the AFAA blog. And every week, this is super fun for me because I get to join with an expert in the field who gets to kind of give a voice to a great topic that I think resonates with all of us. And today's topic is, are you stressed out? And if you are, join the club and let's talk about some ways that we can reset the nervous system, kind of deal with that stress and kind of boost positive emotions. So with me today, I have Dr. Mallory Fox. She owns Foxy Fit, and she is also an NASM master trainer, and I think she's amazing. So Mallory, I'm going to turn it over to you, let you kind of tell us if I missed anything about you.
Thank you so much, Angie, and hello, everyone. I'm so excited and honored to be here with you on this Friday. And I've been a member of the NASM family since 2008. It was my very first personal training certification. And one of the things that I value the most about being a part of the NASM and AFAA family are opportunities like this to connect with other fitness professionals, to learn more about new topics, or even stress has been around forever, but having that ability to just dive in when we have the time and space during this pandemic is really special. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, I'm so glad you joined me here. And Mallory and I, we've crossed paths a number of times. And every time we do, we have these great conversations about so many things, health and wellness related, and what we're doing in this space. And so I always enjoy those conversations. So, one of the first things that I want to talk about is resetting the nervous system. When people say that, I always think about it's putting on the accelerator of the car versus putting on the brakes. So that sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight response. It's that stress. Something big happens, and I think of the parasympathetic like, I'm going to put the brakes on. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to control my breathing, and I'm going to try to reset myself. So how would you describe it, or how do you describe it to your clients?
I love that analogy, Angie, because I think we all can relate to it. One way that I explain to clients is thinking of traffic lights. So when I'm in fight or flight, I'm at a red light where, it's warning. And then where I tend to spend most of my time is on yellow, where I can dive into fight or flight, or I can just as easily drop into the parasympathetic. And then finally, the green light is the parasympathetic, the rest or digest. For me, I find that most often after a sweaty yoga class, where I'm suddenly lying on the mat in Shavasana, and my mind is a little slower, and my breathing is a little slower, my heart rate is slowed down, and I have that really good content moment. And what I've really enjoyed about getting into mindfulness is the ability to drop in to that post-yoga feeling with training and practice.
Yeah, I so agree. And I think, one of the reasons why you and I crossed paths is kind of talking about some health situations that we've encountered. And for you and I both, it's because we live a lot in that red space. We live a lot in that, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And I always have a million things going on, and I don't know how to set proper boundaries and say no to anything. And I can't sleep because my mind is going a million miles an hour. And a lot of why I had to get into mindfulness and meditation is because it ties into the work that I do in mental health and in physical health, but also because it was really necessary in my own life because it was causing me health problems. And so I think that we both came into it from a natural space and this real true desire to help other people to learn how to kind of reset and shift our mindset so that we're not always living in this overactive kind of adrenaline-based state.
And I'm just nodding the whole time you're speaking, Angie, because I so relate. The very first time that I had a doctor tell me I needed to start doing yoga because I had broken my wrist in my sleep. And that's a story for another time, but I was so stressed out that my brain couldn't shut off. And I had this accident that, put my life on hold. The doctor said, you need to find a way to manage your stress. And my response to him was, I'm not stressed. That was just the way that my life was. I was constantly running on that red. And it was, foreign to me to think that that was stress. That was just my regular life.
I agree. Because I think that we think when we're doing impactful work, that's not stress, that's work that I love. And so that was always my thing. What do you mean? I'm doing work that I love. I'm not stressed. I'm living my life. And then you realize that you're living your life. If you're living your life with proper boundaries, then you're not trying to do it all. So yeah, that's so true. So I love that analogy about the lights. And like I said, I always use the accelerator and the brake. And sometimes I just need to learn to not jam on my brakes when I'm in a crisis moment, but to actually, tap the brakes slightly and slow down and remind myself that I really do need to reset. So, one of the things I think is it's important to talk about then in resetting the nervous system and talking about that whole parasympathetic nervous system is how do we shift our mindset? And there's so many different ways in the mental health community that I teach it, and there's ways in the fitness community that I teach it. And a lot of those ways intersect because that's always been my goal, is to bridge the gap between the two. And to say that I think it's hard to be physically healthy if we're not mentally healthy, and vice versa. So you and I have talked a lot about how do we shift the mindset, and I love the way that you told me it. You talked a little bit about practice makes all the difference and we can do it in just one moment. So before we even get to those tips and so forth, tell me about that, the research on practice, practice, practice.
Absolutely. So when I first started mindfulness, because I tend to pick up things quickly, I've always been a good student. I had an expectation that I would just start doing a yoga class and immediately my mind would, be zen, I'd be calm, and I'd look like, the stereotypical yoga student. It was not that way. So my brain, which was used to running around at, to use your analogy, Angie, 120 miles an hour, didn't know how to. When I was trying to slam on the brake, my brain said no. And so I really struggled with that. That led me to research more about how the brain works and how we can train our brains to learn how to slow down. Because just like movement patterns, for example, our brains get stuck in that fight or flight space. And so with training, with repetition, with time, none of these were things I wanted to hear or accept, but they're things that, it's just part of how our brains work and how we're wired.
Right. And it is all about practice. Practice is the mother of skills. So we get better at movement patterns when we practice movement patterns. We build muscle when we, do a lot, when we work on weight training. And so our mind is much the same way. We have to kind of train our mind, train our brain to rethink and to look at our thoughts and then to think about our thoughts differently. But first we have to acknowledge those thoughts, because a lot of us, we live in this space of denial, kind of like, I'm not stressed, I'm not thinking negatively, and we don't really acknowledge how much we have power and control over all these things, so much more than we realize that we do. So definitely practice is all the difference, and it really only takes a moment. And we've talked about all those different moments, but one of the other things that I want to say is I don't think we have to be an expert meditator. We don't have to be a bendy yoga person, right? We don't have to be really, really great at breathing, and know all these expert breathing techniques. We just have to have a big old toolbox full of lots of different tools, and then we have to pick a few that work. But it's kind of like I say about motivation. Motivation is one of those things that changes over time. What motivates me to exercise today is very different from what motivated me to exercise when I was in my 20s, 5 years ago. but it's the same thing with with my toolbox, right? So one day I might be able to rethink my thoughts. I might be able to reframe. And another day that just might not work. I might have to do some breathing exercises. And it could be that something big comes along in my life and I have to try a completely different technique. What do you think?
You are exactly right. And, again, I'm just nodding along because about an hour ago, I had an opportunity to dig into my mindful toolbox. I went to take the trash out outside, and a giant hornet or wasp, some type of flying thing, is building a nest right by my front door. So my mind immediately created all of these stories of, I'm going to get stung by a wasp and I'm not going to be able to do this webinar with Angie. I'm going to, my brain went from taking the trash out to dying on the sidewalk because I got stung by a wasp. And in that moment, I'm sure people can relate. I know I'm a little dramatic, but in that moment, it's our biology. My heart rate skyrocketed. I started breathing heavily. My brain had probably 6,000 thoughts in the space of just a moment. And in the past, I would have been living off of that hormonal rush for the rest of the day, probably the next day. And what I did instead is outside, I took a few deep breaths. I let myself identify all of those crazy thoughts and it's like, okay, this is going to be all right. And then I was able to get back inside. I knew that I was really jittery, so I listened to some music. Yeah. That helped too. And then I did some breathing, and that helped too. So it was fortunately having that whole toolbox that I use frequently and trying some different things helped me to shift and turn it around so that, I could show up here and not feel like a crazy person.
Right. Not feel like you've got the hornet, kind of flying around your head, right? It's that ability to kind of acknowledge what's getting in our space and to kind of recognize and step back away from it and kind of observe our thoughts from the distance and be like, really, Mallory, are you really going there? I had a couple of weeks ago, I took a long bike ride actually with one of our fellow NASM master instructors, and we went on a really long bike ride, and frankly, he was kicking my butt. And I started having these thoughts about, what if I get into an accident, or what if I fall, or what if I scrape on my body, or what if I miss this webinar? And I did the what if game, and then I was like, what if none of those things happen? What if I'm just getting a really good bike ride and I'm getting in some great exercise? And what if I show up to my webinar even better because I had an opportunity to kind of get all that adrenaline out and get some exercise in? So, I always tell people that we don't see the world as the world is. We see the world as we are. And that is, to me, what stress is. Stress is all about perception. So when we talk about resetting the nervous system, I think we have to talk about that whole stress thing, because so many times we think we need to reset the nervous system because we have to get rid of stress. And I always say, you know what? We can't get rid of stress. We're never going to be able to get rid of stress. Your whole life is going to be full of different stressful events. And that really isn't the issue. That's not really the problem. Because, we want the stress continuum. We want there to be a constant ebb and flow of events. And some stress is good stress. Some stress is bad stress. But the main thing is that we have to have the perception that we have what it takes to be able to manage the stress. And so much of that ties into that nervous system response, because right away you were able to reset your nervous system because you said, I have the ability to manage whatever comes my way. I can't prevent this hornet from stinging me, but I can manage what I do even if it does, right?
Yes, and I love that analogy, and I'm going to add the what if to my toolbox because that's a beautiful way to reframe it. I don't have anything to add to that. I wish I could write down all of those thoughts.
I do the what if a lot. I play what if a lot of times with my stuff, when clients do that. Well, what if this, what if that? Well, what if we reframe that, and what if we looked at it from a different way? But, going off the idea that stress is perception, we know that, again, it's not so much the stress that happens to us, it's how we perceive what's happening to us. And do we perceive that we have what it takes? And one of the things that you and I talked about adding to our toolbox is, one of the best things that we've got is not heroic stories of other people managing stress, but our own heroic stories. So after I cared for my mom when she was sick all those years, I thought, even it didn't take long. It took a few months, a year later, where I look back and I thought, I don't think I could ever do that again. But I did it at the time. And if I had been able to foreshadow it, I would have probably thought I couldn't do it. And even after the fact, I thought I couldn't do it again. But really, that's my heroic story of I wouldn't have known it until I had to deal with it. And so my perception is now different. I now have kind of a relative scale of if I can deal with that, I can deal with almost anything.
Yes, I think that's so important. And that's a practice that, I recently started. And I don't know if we've talked about this before, but, I was very much type A, perfectionist. Nothing I did was ever good enough for me. And so that was always driving me to achieve. About a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I had a traumatic brain injury. And in the recovery process, found out that I had lost eyesight in my left eye. So I was suddenly legally blind in my left eye as a result of the accident. And what I had to do at that time was do all of the vision therapy, change my entire lifestyle in order to regain my vision. And I'm really happy to say that I have. If you had told me 2 years ago that I was going to not be able to drive for 9 months, not be able to work for several months, not be able to do all of the things that I love to do, that I truly got my sense of worth and self from, I would have said there's no way I can do that. And knowing now that I have done that, again, like you said, I would never want to do it again, but now I know that I can. And I think it's so important to remind ourselves of who we are.
And that's when you and I actually met, was connecting during that time that you were going through that. And your vulnerability allowed me to share my own personal vulnerability with me or with you. And it was, for both of us, it was a health situation where we kind of met our match and where we were kind of forced to look at our life differently, and where we both looked at doctors like, no, I don't think so. I don't think you know who I am. And then they looked at us like, well, I don't know who you were, but I can tell you who you are now. And you're going to have to figure out how to manage this. And so, that's a journey. It's a journey that involves humility. It's a journey that involves vulnerability. And that's what I admire about you is I've seen your vulnerability, but I've seen your heroism and I've seen your courage. And that's what made me want to have you on today, was just to be able to kind of talk about that. And I was hoping that you would bring that up and share that, because it's such an integral part of your story, and it's really what's made you who you are today.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And it's important to me to share it with other people, because what I have learned from going through what I did is that I'm not alone in this. And I really thought that I was. But everyone is going through things that we will never know. And what was so interesting to me, too, is finding how the people closest to me, because I wasn't saying, hey, this is going on, that's going on, I can't see you. People didn't know. Mm-hmm. And that can create like this lonely space. And it's really important for me now to speak up and to let people know, no matter what it is that you're going through, if you're able to, share, with someone who's safe to speak with, and Angie, you are definitely a wonderful person to connect with over this, then there's a lot of space for connection in that hardship.
I agree,
And
and I think that we have to be careful who we invite in, right? We have to make sure that we're prepared for that because sometimes people don't give us the response that we're anticipating. But here's the deal, like I tell people all the time, what response are you anticipating? Because if we're not sure how we feel about something, then we can't expect other people to be sure how to respond about that something, right? We're not even sure how to manage it. So we have to have some empathy for other people in this space that they're in of, I'm not sure what to say. And sometimes when people are going through a difficult time or they've just experienced a great loss, I say, I'm not really sure what to say. I just want you to know I'm with you.
I love that. Yeah, that is such an empathetic and kind thing to say because, we truly will never know what someone else is going through and walk in their
Right.
shoes. So,
Well, let's talk about, so if we're thinking about, like I said, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And so much of that is perception based. That has to do with values. It has to do with how we see the world. And how we see the world has everything to do with how we grew up, where we live, who we interact with. It has to do with our friends in this network that we keep. But here's the deal. If perception is the name of the game when it comes to stress, we really have to have these tools. We have to believe that we've got what it takes. So let's talk about it because you and I, we built this huge toolbox and I feel like we need to share some of these things. And one of the things that you and I talked about was affirmations. And a lot of times when I tell people about affirmations, they're like, oh, boo, 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 don't talk to me about affirmations. But, I talk about sticky notes, putting affirmations of sticky notes around your house. And some of the things that we fear the most are some of these weird thoughts that we have. So an affirmation could be as simple as, you've got this. Or I know this is tough, but you've been through, even tougher things. And just sticky note reminders. So what do you think about affirmations?
I think they're so important. And I giggled when you said that some people are like, oh, no, because I used to be that person where I thought that affirmations were just a bunch of, yoga things. And they've helped me so much. And in my Hornet story today, that was one of the first tools that I used. I said, I got this. I'm going to be okay. And I love the idea of using sticky notes because when we're in stressful situations, we don't naturally think of, of an affirmation that's positive. I know I go somewhere negative right away. And so having a visual reminder to bring me back to that space of grounding and I got this is so important. So I think that's such an incredible tool to have in your toolbox.
Well, and a visual reminder is really good. And I want you to share the one about washing your hands. But before you do that, I have a silly affirmation. So I'm really big on the whole sticky note concept. But just recently, so I'm a really bad sleeper. And that has to do with that accelerator that I still have a hard time letting up off of. And the other night I was laying in bed and I thought, okay, I know what I'm going to do. So instead of stressing about the fact that I wasn't going to be able to sleep, which is a common mojo that goes on in my brain, I started going to bed and saying these affirmations of, you are such an amazing sleeper. I love the way you sleep. You are such a sound sleeper. It was the silliest thing, but I have to tell you, I'm serious. I fell asleep. And I got more deep sleep than I had gotten in a long time. So instead of this narrative of this constant worry and this narrative of what if I don't get to sleep, or I have to get, oh no, I have to get up 5 hours now. Oh, now I'm down to 4 hours of sleep. So instead of always checking my watch or my phone, I just kept saying, you're an amazing sleeper. Isn't it awesome how good you sleep?
I love that. And it's true, our brains are so powerful. Whatever we keep feeding it is what, it'll create. So I'm going to try that tonight, actually.
Well, it is true. Our brain needs food, and the food that we feed our brain isn't just the food that we digest into our bodies, but the food that we feed our brain is really the thoughts, the constant thoughts that we're feeding our brain. What kind of gas are you putting up in that gas tank? Because sometimes those thoughts are just not very good thoughts. We are not putting premium fuel up there, right? And so we need to get some premium fuel up there, and that premium fuel is those really powerful thoughts. And so, sharing, spinning my narrative to myself and changing my whole story and my whole worry system and saying, oh, you're an amazing sleeper, look at you, then, that made a really big difference. But you also talked about, you shared like the visualization. And I think visualization is huge. They use it with athletes. Visualize yourself crossing the finish line or visualizing yourself benching 350 pounds. And you shared just a simple visualization of washing your hands.
Yes, I mean, washing our hands is such a relevant topic in today's world. And so, what I like to do is I visualize stress, whether it's, physical stress, emotional stress, psychological stress. And whenever I wash my hands, I just picture it washing off and going down the drain. And it really does help me to calm down, to feel really in the moment with what I'm doing. And it's something that's so quick and so easy to access.
Okay, perfect. So let's go back and forth. We promised an in-the-moment reset strategy, so we have to give at least 5, I think, okay? So one of the in-the-moment reset strategies that I like to use is I like to step outside. So sometimes I'm sitting inside for hours and hours and hours and I'm talking to clients and I forget that my back door is only a few feet away. I'm like, Angie, just step outside, get some sunshine, take the headphones off and reset. And I walk out there and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's the real world out here. So that's one reset. Give me another in the moment reset.
Yes, one of my favorites is to just make fists, to really engage the muscles and take a deep breath in. And then on my exhale, I just let everything go.
I love that. I do that in my car sometimes. I grab the steering wheel like I'm going to bend the steering wheel. People next to me are probably like, what is that crazy girl doing? But little do they know I'm resetting my nervous system so I don't yell at them for not driving like I do. But anyway, so there's that. There's the progressive muscle relaxation. There's the walking outside. I heard a great one. Actually, my director shared this with me about a year ago where she watched a whole special on walking through doorways and how every time you walk through a doorway, it's a form of resetting. So they talk about going through your house and walking through every doorway in your house, because every time you walk through a doorway, you leave behind whatever is in that room and you walk forward through a doorway into something new and unique and different. And so I used to do that with my students. When I taught my college students stress management, I used to have them all stand up. And then I would have them visualize turning around and closing the door behind them. And then I would say, see, that's done now. You only have one direction you can go. What direction is that? And you have to go forward, because if you turn around and you keep looking back, you're going to bump your nose right on that door and you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to keep hitting just blocked walls. And that's what life is like. Why are you going after resistance? At some point, you have to close the door behind you. You have to walk through an open door and you have to invite in whatever's ahead of you, no matter if it scares the living, you know what, out of you.
I love that. I'm definitely putting that into my mindful toolbox because, obsessing about the past is something that, is one of those automatic negative thoughts that comes into my head. So I love that. Thank you for sharing.
And we are going to get to, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah. One tool that I really love to kind of bring myself back into the present moment is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 strategy. And it's just based on our 5 senses. So I'll stop where I am and I'll name 5 things that I can see. So my water bottle, my phone, my computer, Angie, and my ring light. And then I'll name 4 things that I feel making contact with my body. So right now, that's the carpet under my feet, that's my Lululemon leggings, that's the headphones on my head, and this bracelet on my wrist. And then I'll name 3 things that I hear, 2 things that I smell, and 1 thing that I taste. And that will take me out of wherever my brain, was, and bring me to what's happening right here in my body, in my space. And I promise it's like a magic eraser.
Oh my goodness. You know what? That's my favorite one. You've been holding out on me, Mallory. That is my favorite one. You know, that's my best takeaway of the whole day. You just gave me the best Friday reset. How come I never heard about that? So,
Oh, thank you.
and you know
I'm happy
that
to share.
good.
I,
And
I
you know the
didn't I didn't come up
visualization.
with it myself.
That's okay. I don't think any of us came up with anything. The visualization of clearing the whiteboard is another one that I use, by the way. You know, I talk a lot about by the end of the day, my whiteboard is completely full. There's so much information written on it. I don't have any more space in my brain. Everything is on overload, and sometimes I have to do a reset in order to clear my whiteboard. And it's that visualization of looking at a clean whiteboard. I have a great slide that I use in my meditation lecture about cleaning the whiteboard. It shows the whiteboard all messy and full of thoughts. And then after a meditation session, there's the whiteboard that's completely cleansed. And I absolutely love that visualization because that's really what I'm doing. Anytime I'm resetting, I'm trying to clear some space on the whiteboard so that I'm not just so cluttered and on overdrive all the time.
I love that. I'm gonna use that. You've
So
added so much to my toolbox today.
there we go. Well, I hope that's what we're doing for everybody. So do you have another in the moment, like something just in the moment?
A deep breath is my go-to, and it's just a way that I quickly can let go of stress, especially if I'm by myself. I love a technique called a lion's breath from yoga, where you can stick out your tongue and flutter your lips. You could just get some of that extra energy out.
Okay, perfect. And I have one that's called grounding. So you take a hard object that won't move, like a wall, and you push against it as hard. I just did it and shook my whole computer, sorry. Where you push against a wall, as I forgot, my desk moves. You push against a wall as hard as you possibly can. And it's a grounding technique. It's like a reminder that there's something stable and strong that you can hold on to. And that is actually one of my favorites because it's kind of like progressive muscle relaxation where I have something hard to push against. And the other day I was doing it and my husband walked into the room and he's like, you know, that kitchen counter is not going to move, don't you? I was like, dude, you're missing the point. But anyway.
I love that. You're like, that's exactly my point.
And if it
you
does,
know,
then I win a prize.
yeah. Yeah, building on that too. I love to use something like a sip of water or a cup of coffee. It's something that's very tangible. It's right there. And just giving myself a moment to soak it in, to smell the beans, to notice the water as it goes down my throat. Those are all things that help, again, bring me out of everywhere else my brain likes to be and right back into right now.
I love that. It's funny. I work with a therapist who always who always asks every client, can I get you a little bit of water? Can I get you something to drink? And it's her way of just kind of like making them feel at home, but also just kind of resetting, right? Or if they get really, really upset, then, can I get you something to drink? Just kind of a little giving the brain a different place to go, if only for a moment, to kind of bring yourself back. So I think we kind of named a lot of, we gave a lot of just in the moment stuff. Because I know a lot of times people say things like, well, exercise, then people are like, well, yeah, that's great, except that takes time. But really my goal for today was what's some in the moment stuff that I can use to reset? Some truly, truly in the moment, like we're not messing around here. We're not saying you have to go swing kettlebells for 30 minutes. We're not saying you have to take an hour walk. We're just giving you some in the moment strategies that aren't going to change your life, but they are going to change your brain. And they are going to give you a chance to kind of step in for a minute and go, okay. So after you reset, we talked about those automatic negative thoughts. And some of those are a lot of the reason why we need to reset. And automatic negative thoughts are that kind of that rabbit hole, right? You just fall right down into the rabbit hole of all those thoughts. And I call it thought looping or thought spinning or chasing my thoughts or whatever you might want to call it. But tell me a little bit about automatic negative thoughts.
Well, I think I'm, probably the Olympic champion of automatic negative thoughts, as evidenced by my Hornet story of today. I immediately went to the space of that's a murder hornet. It's come to get me. They're in the U.S. now, and
I can
I'm
see.
gonna I'm gonna get stung. I'm going to miss the webinar. I'm going to die on the sidewalk, or be so dehydrated because it's 110 degrees outside. That's just that immediate downward spiral, and that's also part of being human. I do not remember the exact statistic on how many of our thoughts are negative versus positive, but I do remember from research, and Angie, you might know the number. I do remember from research, we are, I think it's 80% more likely to have negative thoughts, and say 20% of our thoughts are naturally positive. So it's part of being human. It's part of the way that our brains help to protect us and keep us alive is to go there, and we can change it slowly. First, we have to identify it. We have to realize that it's an automatic negative thought that is not necessarily reality. And then we can bring in some tools to take us out of that roller coaster of the ants.
Absolutely. So it's Daniel Amen who talks about the automatic negative thoughts, and but they're described in a lot of different types of mental health therapies. There's a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, and we talk a lot about the automatic thoughts and what we do with them, and to really kind of help people understand too what automatic thoughts are. Some of them would be things like always, never. You always do that. I never do this. This always happens to me. That never goes right. The always never, the extremist type of thinking is an automatic negative thought. And another one is fortune telling is what Daniel Amen calls it, but I also call it future tripping. So I call my daughters out a lot on future tripping because, of course, I love to call other people out on what I do. And I'm like, I think you're future tripping because I'm pretty sure that hasn't happened yet. So there we go into the what ifs. Another one is the guilts, the shoulds. And in a previous webinar, I mentioned Albert Ellis's masturbating. I must do this, I must do that, I should do this. And another one is blaming. So we suffice to blame other people because if it's another person's fault, then what? It doesn't fix the problem. So, blaming kind of gets us nowhere. And taking things personally. And I actually have a great NASM video coming up on why we take things personally, because it's another kind of humanistic thing that we do. So those are kind of some of the automatic negative thoughts, right?
Yes, and I can't wait to see that video. I always learn so much from you, Angie. And as you were going through the always never, the future tripping, the guilt, I was like, you know what? I had every single one of those in my little hornet aspect, and I wasn't even aware until you shared that I did have that momentary thought of blaming my husband because, I was taking out the trash. And when you shared that, I thought, oh my goodness, yeah, I had that too. And I wasn't even aware that was there for me. So I just had a light bulb go off in my brain. Thank you for that.
not to scare you, but a true story. We were out by the pool a few years ago, and my husband kept saying, if you leave wasps alone, they won't bother you. Well, that was true until it wasn't, because I got stung, and I still blame him. Because I was like, I was leaving that wasp alone and it still stung me. So on the automatic negative thoughts, I always talk to my clients about not taking the bait. And I'm not a real big fisher person, but still, I like the analogy that I don't have to take the bait. I do have to acknowledge that I'm having this automatic negative thought. I do have to acknowledge, what if it's not true? But I don't have to take the bait. I don't have to wrap it around me like a warm blanket and be like, oh, yes, I am in fact going to die from this hornet. So I don't have to take the bait. Instead, I can acknowledge it, recognize that it's an automatic thought, and then I can do something that I learned in one of the therapies that I study, which again was acceptance and commitment therapy, which is diffusing. I can diffuse it. I can figure out a way to give it less power, right? It's like if I try to put a lid on a boiling pot, it's going to try to boil more. So instead, I need to take the lid off and I need to figure out how to get that pot not to boil over. I have to diffuse it by turning down the flame of the fire.
Ooh, I love that. I'm learning so much from you, and it's I love to figure out how things work. So having that understanding of what you do with the negative thoughts, where I get stuck sometimes is, well, why am I having these thoughts? And so you just gave such great insight into what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Well, why is a slippery slope, isn't it? I always tell people, why is a slippery slope? It's a real big rabbit hole. Why did this happen to me? Why did my mom get sick? Why did the doctor tell me that this is wrong with me? Why me? Why me? Why me? Why is a slippery slope? I don't know why. I don't know why, but I only know what now. Because why is that closed door behind me? But what now is when I open the door and I say, you know what, this is what I've got in front of me. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah. Powerful.
And you did that.
Yeah, I've done that. I'll have to, remind myself I've done that. And I didn't used to do that. So, I'm a very stubborn person. I tend to think that I know what's best. And anyone who's watching this and, is unsure of whether they can do this too, I'm here to tell you that you absolutely can. You absolutely can retrain your brain and how you respond to these automatic negative thoughts and really change. Again, I love what you said about, it's not, what was that? The world is, it's how we see the world.
Right.
Changing how we see the world is it's life changing.
Yeah, because I think, I always say something to the effect, I always say it different every time, but something to the effect of, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are, and that's why there's so much strife going on social media, is because people see the world as they are. They don't see the world as it really is, because we all see it through our own lens, but our lens turns out pretty narrow. We don't have a real broad lens because we're just human, right? So, and we are flawed. We don't need to be fixed, but we're flawed. And sometimes we just need a little repair. So one of the strategies that I use with automatic negative thoughts is, one of the diffusion strategies is, we often label. We say things like, I'm a bad sleeper. That's my favorite one. That's my Angie go-to favorite. I'm a bad sleeper. That's why I had to change that the other night. Or we say things like, I'm just anxious. And so I went to a workshop once and they said, what if we diffuse it by distancing ourselves from our label? So we take that label, and instead of saying, I'm anxious, because if I am, now what? Now I'm kind of stuck. I'm standing in quicksand. I'm anxious, therefore I'm anxious. And everybody around you is like, yes, I know. So, but what if we distance ourselves? And what if we say, oh, there I am, feeling like I'm anxious again. I've just added something to it. Or there I am, I see that I'm thinking I'm anxious again. But I'm not qualifying me as being a certain way. I'm leaving some room for growth.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That can be so helpful, because I think we might have spoken about this before, but the power of our words and how we perceive ourselves. And I know when I had to change, when I was faced with a medical issue I couldn't fix myself, that was the way that I saw myself. I am independent. I, don't need other people to help me. Really got in my way from being able to heal and change. And so if I can say, oh, there I go, I see myself being independent again, it allows me, like you said, the space to make a different choice.
Mm-hmm. It's qualifiers kind of are as they are. Do you know what I mean? The sky is blue. Okay. But the sky has a little bit of white and a little bit of color, and there we all see the sky a little bit differently. So yeah, that's just one diffusion technique. But what do you think? What really helps you kind of diffuse some of those thoughts?
Oh, that's such a good question. My wheels are turning right now. I think that will be a really powerful tool, of just, naming it. And for me, it's letting myself think through that, instead of just pretending like it's not there. Because sometimes, it's like, it's easier for me to fix it if I can pretend it never happened. So that's one of the ways, is just allowing it. Okay, it's here, and I'm going to give myself some time to sit in that, and then make a decision about what I want to do with it later.
Perfect. It's like just sitting with it, and I love that. Just sit with it. Just sit with it. What if you don't have to do anything with it right now? What if you just sit with it because you're not really sure what you want to do? But another one that I have tried is sing it back in a silly voice. And I can't sing, so I could never do that because y'all would never, ever tune in again. But let's just say that my thought was, I am anxious. So then I encourage my clients, because I can't do it, but I encourage my clients to either talk in like a Daffy Duck voice and say, I am anxious, or to sing it back in a ridiculous voice. And I did that with a client recently who was a teenager, and I think I mortified him. I might have scarred him for life. So I've decided from now on it has to be my client. I give them the idea, and then they have to sing it back. But I thought I was going to do a demonstration. It didn't go so well. So you can sing it back in a silly voice. You can say it in a Daffy Duck voice. You can walk around and take your walk, and inside use your Daffy Duck voice and say, I am anxious, I am anxious. And I don't know how Daffy Duck talks, but anyway. So that's another one. And another one that I wrote down was write it back and talk back to it. So, you write it on a piece of paper, and you've got this thing, and then talk back to it, and then write an affirmation next to it. Okay. So I'm noticing that I'm feeling anxious right now, but my affirmation is I felt anxious before, and I'm still here. I was still able to survive.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and that's it's I think such a great tool, because it also reminds you, yeah, I've done this before. I've been here before, and I've gotten through it.
Yeah. So many times with those automatic negative thoughts, it's just owning them. You have to claim it to tame it. So you have to own it. You have to recognize that it's there. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with that. You have to turn it around by doing all these different tools that we've kind of talked about, right? Whether, any diffusion strategy that works for you. And sometimes it's just a reset strategy that's in the moment. So, last but not least, we just kind of talked about building resilience and boosting positive emotions. And I think that at the end of the day, what happens is if we reset our nervous system and we get rid of these automatic negative thoughts, we make space for boosting positive emotions. We make space to invite in whatever is positive. And one of the greatest ways to do that is just to lead with gratitude. And people are like, oh, gratitude. But the thing is that really, it helps me to fall asleep at night. If I lay in bed and I go over my day and I do a litany of everything that went wrong, I'm not going to sleep. But if I lay in bed and go through everything that went right, even if I have to search into the deep recesses of my mind, yours is going to be, I didn't get stung by that hornet. I had a great talk with Angie today with a bunch of amazing fitness pros. So, boosting positive emotions so much isn't about, here, let me give you 5 tools to boost your emotions. And you walk away going, really? It's really just about making space to invite in the positive emotion. Getting rid of all that clutter that's up here and being able to see the world differently. When I step outside, I go, it's pretty cool that I can go outside and I can see sunshine, and I've got a roof over my head, and I've got friends, and yeah.
Yeah, it's so important. That's one of the things. I started a gratitude practice while I was recovering my eyesight and from my brain injury. And yeah, there were days, and I would do it in the morning when I got up and before I went to bed. Because there were days when I just got up and I felt hopeless. And that's really like giving my power away, to just kind of surrender, to a difficult situation. And so waking up and choosing to notice 3 things that I was grateful for. Some days it was, I'm grateful I have air conditioning. I'm grateful that I woke up, and, I'm grateful for my puppy who's next to me. It might be really simple things, but it was it probably saved my life. going through such a difficult time, because it helped me remember and, begin my day by saying, I don't have control over my eyesight, but I do have control over, how I'm putting my mental energy today.
Thank you. And you know what? That's exactly what I love about you is your calming presence and the fact that gratitude has really led the way. You've done so much good work through this journey, and your story is a truly admirable story that we could all learn from. And you left on a note that I'd really like to leave on, and that is you hit on something that is one of my favorite things to say and it's about positive control. Where do I have positive control? And that's really like kind of my guiding light for everything is if you want to talk about control, let's talk about positive control. And for you, you said, hey, you know what? I don't have control over my eyesight, but I do have control over X, Y, and Z. So I may not have control over my genetics and the things that I'm experiencing in my life, but guess what? I do have control over what I'm going to do with my mind. I do have control over how I'm going to eat to mitigate the effects. I do have control over how I'm going to live my life so that I can make an impactful difference for others, which then seems to make sense of our own stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love how you sum that up so beautifully. It's true. It puts us back in a position of, I can't fix the world, but I can address how I show up in it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I appreciate all of you out there in the AFAA community, all of you out there dealing with what you're dealing with. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I do hope that we offered some powerful thoughts on resetting the nervous system, building some positive emotion, and not getting rid of stress, but managing it wholeheartedly. And share your stories, share your energy, and give this space to other people. Invite others into your world because it really makes all the difference. So thanks so much to all of you out there. Thank you, Mallory. Thanks for being a friend. And thanks for being an expert in the field and doing what you do. Bye to you all.
Thank you so much.